You won't believe what she found on the memory card of the surveillance camera hidden outside the subject's house. A routine infidelity case, the kind that pays the bills. She had done it 100 times before. She knew exactly what she was looking for. What she found on that memory card was not what she was looking for. Tonight we have 3 true horror stories from private investigators who went looking for ordinary answers and found something in the rain-soaked dark that changed them permanently. Lock your doors, listen to the rain on your window, and remember that somewhere in this city tonight a private investigator is sitting in a dark car, watching a dark house, hoping with everything they have that what they find is ordinary. Some of them are not so lucky. Story 1, the memory card. I have been a private investigator for 14 years. I want to establish that before anything else because I think it matters to how you receive what I am about to tell you. 14 years means I have seen things that would turn most people's hair white. 14 years means I have sat in the dark outside houses and hotels and office buildings and watched people do things they would never do if they knew anyone was watching. 14 years means I have a high threshold for disturbing and a very clear sense of what that word actually means when it is applied to real human behavior rather than the sanitized versions of it that appear in films and television. What I found on that memory card exceeded my threshold significantly, and I want you to hold that in mind as I tell you what led up to finding it. The client was a woman named Sandra, mid-40s, well-dressed, the specific composed expression of someone who has been rehearsing calm for so long it has become the default setting. She came to my office on a Tuesday evening when the rain was coming down hard enough to blur the streetlights outside my window into orange smears, and she sat in the chair across from my desk and she told me she believed her husband was having an affair. His name was Thomas. They had been married for 19 years. He worked in commercial property management and traveled frequently for work, which was, she said, the cover under which the affair was presumably happening. She did not cry when she told me this. She spoke with the flat, precise language of someone who has already processed the emotional component of the information and is now in the operational phase. I took the case. Standard surveillance package. 2 weeks minimum. Daily reports. Photographic evidence where possible. I set up on Thomas within 48 hours. He was, in fact, having an affair. This became clear within the first 4 days of surveillance. A woman roughly his age, an apartment in the west end of the city that he visited on Tuesday and Thursday evenings when he was supposed to be at client dinners. I documented it the way I document everything. Photographs, timestamps, location data, the dry clinical record of a life being conducted dishonestly. This was the ordinary case Sandra had hired me to investigate. I had it wrapped up by the end of week 1, but I had planted a trail camera in the tree line at the edge of Thomas and Sandra's property during the initial setup phase, a precaution I take on every case. A wide-angle lens covering the front of the property, motion activated, time-stamped, recording to a 16-gigabyte memory card that I retrieved and replaced every 5 days. I do this as a matter of routine because people behave differently at home than they do in the world, and sometimes the home footage tells a story the external surveillance does not. I retrieved the memory card on day 11 of the surveillance. I downloaded the footage onto my laptop that evening in my car outside my office, with the rain hammering on the roof and a coffee going cold in the cup holder. The first 9 days of footage were exactly what trail camera footage outside a suburban house looks like. Thomas leaving in the morning, Sandra leaving shortly after, the postman, a delivery driver, a neighbor's cat that crossed the frame at approximately 2:30 every morning with the unhurried confidence of an animal that owns the night. Day 10, at 11:47 p.m. on the night of day 10, a car I did not recognize pulled up outside the house and parked across the street. It sat there for 4 minutes with its engine running and its lights on. Then the lights went off and the engine cut and the car just sat there in the dark and the rain. I watched this on my laptop screen with a coffee going cold in my hand and my threshold for disturbing beginning its slow recalibration. The car sat outside Thomas and Sandra's house for 3 hours and 22 minutes. During that time, the interior light of the car came on twice, briefly both times, long enough each time for the camera to catch a figure in the driver's seat. A man, I thought, though the resolution at that distance in the rain at night was not sufficient for certainty. Sitting very still, facing the house, at 3:09 in the morning the engine started and the lights came on and the car drove away. I ran the plates the following morning. The car was registered to a man who had died 14 months earlier. I sat with that information for a long time. There are ordinary explanations for a car registered to a deceased person. The registration had not been updated after a sale. The vehicle had been inherited and not retitled. Any number of administrative and bureaucratic reasons why a car on the road might carry a dead man's name on its registration. I told myself these things. I am a practical person. I deal in evidence, not in atmosphere. I ran the deceased man's name through my databases. His name was Gerald Marsh. He had died 14 months earlier. The cause of death listed on his death certificate was a fall from a height at a rural property. The rural property was listed in his estate records. The address of that rural property was 11 miles from the suburban house where Thomas and Sandra lived. I cross-referenced Gerald Marsh's name with Thomas's name in every database I had access to. They had no professional connection I could find, no social connection, no financial connection. But Gerald Marsh had made 4 calls to Thomas's personal cell phone in the 30 days before his death. The call records were in a civil litigation file that was publicly accessible. Gerald Marsh had been the subject of a property dispute with a development company in the months before he died. Thomas worked in commercial property management. I brought my findings to Sandra along with the evidence of the affair. She looked at the photographs of Thomas and the woman from the West End apartment with the expression of someone confirming something they had already known. Then I showed her the trail camera footage and the information about Gerald Marsh. Her expression changed. She said, "He told me Gerald Marsh fell, that it was an accident, that he was there for a site visit when it happened." She said, "He never told me he knew him personally." I referred what I had found to a detective I know in the police department. I told him what the footage showed and what the records suggested, and I gave him a copy of everything I had documented. The investigation that followed is not mine to describe in detail because it is ongoing and because I have been asked not to discuss the specifics. What I will tell you is that Thomas no longer lives in that house. What I will tell you is that the rural property where Gerald Marsh died has been the subject of a search warrant. What I will tell you is that the detective I referred the case to called me 3 weeks after I handed him my files and said only, "You were right to bring this to me. You were right to trust what you saw." He did not elaborate. I did not ask him to. I still run trail cameras on every surveillance case. I still retrieve and review the footage, but I take longer than I used to before I open the files. I sit with the closed laptop for a moment, and I listen to whatever is outside. Rain usually, traffic, the ordinary sounds of the world continuing. And I remind myself that most of what I find is ordinary, most of it. What do you think Thomas was doing in that car outside his own house at midnight? And what do you think the detective found at Gerald Marsh's rural property that he could not bring himself to describe over the phone? The rain falls on everything equally, on the ordinary and on the monstrous, on the houses of the innocent and on the houses of the guilty. And private investigators learn, eventually, that the difference between the two is far thinner than anyone who has not looked closely would like to believe. The next story proves that some missing persons cases are missing for a reason. Story 2. The Road into the Trees. I want to tell you about the case that ended my career, not dramatically, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in the slow, inevitable way of something that accumulates weight until the structure it is resting on can no longer hold it. The case did not break me in one night. It broke me over the following months as I processed what I had found and what it meant and what it said about the specific dark corner of the world I had been paid to look into. I have been retired for 2 years. I am telling this story now for the first time because I think someone should know it, and because I am far enough removed from it now to describe it without the specific physical reaction it used to produce in me, the cold sweat, the elevated heart rate, the sensation that the walls of whatever room I was in were closer than they should be. I am past that now. Mostly, the missing person was a man named Ray Coulter, 41 years old, divorced, no children, a freelance electrician who worked a regular circuit of construction sites in a rural county 2 hours east of the city where I was based. He had been reported missing by his ex-wife, who despite the divorce was the only person who noticed when he failed to respond to messages for 2 weeks. The local police had filed a report and conducted a cursory investigation and found nothing and quietly downgraded the case. His ex-wife, convinced they had not looked hard enough, hired me. It was November. It had been raining for 11 consecutive days when I drove out to the county where Ray had last been seen. The kind of persistent autumn rain that turns dirt roads to mud and fills the drainage ditches to the brim and makes the countryside look abandoned even when it is not. I remember the windscreen wipers going the entire drive and the specific gray flatness of the light and the way the fields on either side of the road looked waterlogged and exhausted. The last confirmed sighting of Ray Coulter was at a petrol station on the edge of a small town on a Thursday evening. He had filled his van and bought a coffee and spoken briefly to the man behind the counter who remembered him because he had been a regular on that route for several years. The man behind the counter told me Ray had seemed fine, normal, in a hurry maybe, but nothing alarming. The petrol station's external camera had captured Ray's van pulling out onto the main road and turning east, away from town, into the stretch of road that ran along the edge of a large private forestry plantation that covered several thousand acres of the county's eastern edge. The van had never been found. I spent 2 days working the town, talking to people who had known Ray professionally, trying to establish whether he had been working on a site in the eastern part of the county around the time he disappeared. I found nothing through official channels, no site records, no contracted work, no reason for him to have been heading east on that Thursday evening. On my third day, I drove the road east of the petrol station myself. Rain again, heavier than the previous days. The kind of rain that makes visibility difficult and turns the unpaved tracks that lead off into the forestry into rivers of brown water. I drove slowly with my window down despite the rain because I was looking for anything that might indicate where Ray's van had gone after turning off the main road. I almost missed it. A track leading off the main road into the trees, not one of the marked forestry access roads that appeared on the map. Those were gated and signposted. This was narrower, older, the kind of track that predates the forestry and runs through it rather than being part of it. The entrance was partially concealed by overgrown hedgerow, and the mud at its opening was churned in a way that suggested recent vehicle use despite the track not appearing on any map I had. I turned in. I drove approximately half a mile into the trees before the track became too muddy for my car to safely continue. I got out and walked. The rain was in the canopy overhead and the light under the trees was dim and greenish, and the ground on either side of the track was soft and dark, and in places the water was pooling in low-lying areas into shallow temporary ponds that reflected the gray sky above the tree canopy. I walked for perhaps 20 minutes, and then the trees opened into a clearing. There was a structure in the clearing, not a building exactly, a collection of structures, various ages and materials, assembled over what must have been years with the specific organic quality of something that had grown rather than been built. A central structure that might once have been an agricultural outbuilding, its original function long since subsumed by additions and modifications that had accreted around it like barnacles. Corrugated metal sheeting, tarpaulin stretched between poles, wooden pallets used as walls and floors. Cable and rope and wire strung between the trees at the clearing's edge carrying lights, ordinary household bulbs in weatherproof fittings that were not currently on but whose presence indicated a power source somewhere in the structure, and Ray Coulter's van parked at the far edge of the clearing with its keys still in the ignition and a coffee cup in the holder that had grown a thin skim of mold across the surface of the cold liquid inside it. I want to be very careful about how I describe what I found inside the central structure because some of it formed part of a subsequent police investigation, and I was asked at the time to limit what I disclosed publicly What I will tell you is what is a matter of public record following that investigation. The structure had been inhabited continuously and for a significant period of time by multiple people. The evidence of habitation, sleeping areas, food preparation, the accumulated material of daily life, suggested not days or weeks but years. The records and documentation found inside the structure suggested that the people who had lived there had, in at least some cases, not chosen to be there. Ray Coulter was not found in the clearing or in the structure. He was found 11 days later by the police search team in a drainage channel approximately 300 meters from the clearing in a condition consistent with having been there since shortly after his disappearance. The investigation that followed the discovery of the clearing is ongoing. I gave my full statement and my full documentation to the investigating officers, and I drove back to the city in the rain, and I sat in my car outside my office for a very long time before I went inside. I filed my report to Ray Coulter's ex-wife the following morning. I told her that Ray had been found and that the police were investigating the circumstances of his death, and that she should contact the investigating officers directly for further information. I told her I was sorry. I closed my files that afternoon. I have not taken a case since. What I think about most, in the 2 years since that November, is the lights strung between the trees at the clearing's edge, the ordinary household bulbs in their weatherproof fittings, running on a power source I never identified, in a clearing that appeared on no map and was accessible only by a track concealed by overgrown hedgerow on a road that very few people used. Someone had put those lights there because they intended to stay, because they had been staying, because the dark for them was not something to be afraid of but something to use. What do you think was in the documentation found inside that structure? And how many people do you think knew that clearing existed before Ray Coulter turned down that track? Some investigations lead you somewhere you cannot come back from unchanged. The final story tonight is the one that will stay with you longest in the rain, because unlike the others, what the investigator found was not a place or a person or a crime. It was a pattern, the most terrifying kind of evidence there is, because a pattern means it has happened before and it will happen again. Story 3, the pattern. I specialize in background checks. I know that sounds unglamorous compared to the surveillance work and the missing persons cases that make up the dramatic end of private investigation. Background checks are the quiet end of the profession, the due diligence work that corporations and law firms and occasionally private individuals commission when they need to know who they are dealing with before they deal with them. It is methodical work, database work, pattern recognition work, the kind of work that rewards patience and attention to detail rather than the instincts and fieldcraft that the more dramatic end of the profession requires. I am very good at it. I have been doing it for 11 years, and I have developed a sensitivity to certain signals in the data, the specific combinations of records and absences of records that indicate a person who is not what they present themselves as being. Most of the time when I pick up those signals, the explanation is mundane: financial irregularities, misrepresented credentials, the ordinary dishonesty of people who want to appear more stable or more qualified than they are. Occasionally the signals indicate something worse. The subject of the background check was a man named Martin Fell. The client was a regional property development company that was considering bringing Fell in as a senior partner. Standard professional background check: employment history, financial records, litigation history, credential verification. Nothing unusual about the commission. Martin Fell was 53 years old. He presented as a property developer with 30 years of experience across 4 regions. His CV was detailed and plausible, and his references were uniformly positive. His financial records showed a man who had done well professionally. No significant debt, no bankruptcies, no judgments against him. On the surface, he was exactly what he appeared to be. I almost missed the first signal entirely. It was in the employment history, a gap of 14 months between 2009 and 2011 that was not accounted for on his CV, and that produced nothing in the employment database for that period. Gaps in employment history are common and usually innocent, but I flag them as a matter of course and investigate the surrounding period more closely when I find them. The investigation of the surrounding period produced a second signal. In 2009, 6 months before the employment gap began, a woman named Claire Hooper had filed a complaint with the police in the city where Martin Fell had been working at the time. The complaint was against a man whose description was consistent with Fell's appearance and who she had met through a professional networking event. The complaint alleged harassment and threatening behavior. It had been investigated and no charges had been filed due to insufficient evidence. Claire Hooper had moved away from that city within 3 months of filing the complaint. I widened my search. Every city where Martin Fell had worked over his 30-year career, every period of residence, every professional context he had operated in. The rain was coming down outside my office window, and I had been at my desk for 11 hours straight, and the cold coffee at my elbow had been cold for so long I had stopped noticing it was there. I was deep in the specific focus state that this kind of database work produces. The world narrowed to the screen in front of me and the records accumulating in my files, and the pattern that was slowly, unmistakably emerging from them. 7 women over 30 years. 7 women in 7 different cities who had filed complaints or restraining order applications, or who had moved suddenly and without obvious reason from locations where Martin Fell had been present at the time. 7 women whose names and faces and circumstances were entirely unconnected to each other except for one thing. Each of them had at some point been in professional proximity to Martin Fell, and each of them had then disappeared from his professional and personal landscape in a way that suggested not a natural ending of the connection but a severing of it, abrupt, complete, and in several cases accompanied by a formal record of distress. I want to be clear about what I did and did not find, because I think precision matters here. I did not find evidence of any crime committed by Martin Fell that had resulted in a charge or a conviction. What I found was a pattern of associations, the specific recurrence of a circumstance across 30 years in 7 cities that, individually, each had an innocent or at least unprovable explanation, but that collectively described something that I did not have a word for, that was not the word I did not want to use. I documented everything, every record, every name, every date, every address, every complaint and restraining order application and sudden relocation. I built the picture as completely as I was able to build it from the available records, and then I sat at my desk in the rain-soaked dark of my office, and I thought about what to do with it. I called the client and told them I could not recommend Martin Fell for the partnership and that I was prepared to share my documentation with them, but that they should be aware its contents were serious and that they should consider their legal obligations carefully before proceeding. They thanked me and ended the call, and I do not know what they did with the information afterward. I spent 3 days building a summary document and sent it to a detective in each of the 7 cities where the 7 women had filed complaints or moved suddenly. Most of them did not respond. 2 of them responded with acknowledgments that were professional and non-committal. One of them, a detective in the 3rd city, the one with the most recent and most fully documented incident, called me directly and spoke to me for 40 minutes and asked me to send my full documentation and said she would be in touch. She has not been in touch. It has been 8 months. Martin Fell did not get the partnership. I know this because the development company's public filings show a different name in the senior partner position announced 6 months after my report. Whether this was because of my findings or for entirely unrelated reasons, I do not know. Martin Fell is still out there, working somewhere, in some city, in proximity to women whose names I do not know, and whose faces I have never seen, and who have no idea that a private investigator in a rain-soaked office once built a 30-year map of the space around them and sent it to detectives who did not call back. I think about those 7 women often. I think about the ones I know about and the ones I probably do not. I think about the detective who said she would be in touch and has not been in touch for 8 months, and I think about Martin Fell. Somewhere right now in some city in the rain, professional, plausible, well-referenced, arriving in a new context with a 30-year history that looks, on the surface, exactly like what it is supposed to look like, and I wonder how long until the 8th. What would you do with a pattern like that, and how do you think Martin Fell would react if he knew someone had built that map? Thank you for listening. 3 cases from the rain-soaked end of a profession that sees the world as it actually is, rather than as it presents itself. The memory card that turned a routine infidelity case into something that required a detective and a search warrant and a phone call that could not be finished over the phone. The track into the trees that led to a clearing that appeared on no map and contained a structure that had been inhabited for years by people who had not all chosen to be there. And the pattern: 30 years in 7 cities and 7 women and a man who is still out there tonight in some city in the rain, being exactly as plausible and professional and well referenced as he has always been. Private investigators see what most people never see. They look into the corners that ordinary life keeps carefully lit, and they find what lives in the dark there. Sometimes it is ordinary, often it is sad, occasionally it is something that does not have a comfortable name, and that stays with you in the specific way that true things stay with you, not fading with time but becoming more present, more detailed, more real the longer you carry them. If you are listening to this tonight in the dark, with the rain on the glass, lock your doors, trust your instincts about the people around you, and if you have ever felt that someone is watching you in the specific patient way of someone who has decided something about you and is simply waiting for the right moment, trust that feeling. It has never been wrong more often than it has been right. Like and subscribe for new horror stories every single week. Leave a comment telling me which story kept you awake, and if you have your own story about something you discovered that you were not supposed to discover, something that changed how you see the world around you, leave it below. We read every single one. Good night, stay safe, and listen to the rain.